So Detective McElderry was one of the original detectives assigned to Mitrice's case early on. To be honest, his involvement while he was on the case from the beginning, he wasn't actively involved. I mean, he would, I don't know, like he came out maybe once or twice when there was someone thought they discovered a bone, and then, he had to come out for that. Certainly during the drone search, he came out for that. But otherwise, he was not someone who I had regular contact with, or any of us had regular contact with. And we actually, to the extent that we were actually surprised that when Mitrice's remains were discovered on August 9th, 2010, we were actually surprised that he was at the site of the remains. Him and his partner, Detective Kevin Acevedo, that they were both down there at the site of her remains, and that they were down there for a significant amount of time, and that they were actively involved in the removal of her naked skeletal remains from that, from the mountainous areas in Malibu Canyon. So his involvement, it just wasn't a lot until he decided to move her body. And then it's like, why are you putting so much energy into destroying the scene? Why are you, disobeying the orders of the coroners and removing a body? You're a homicide detective. You know you're not supposed to do it anyway. So that's sort of when his name.
Why do we think he did that?
And so that's the thing that's puzzling, because he'd had not that much involvement in the case, even though he was the detective. It is I cannot imagine what he was trying to cover up, conceal, hide, even if it was from his own actions or the actions of maybe a fellow officer. I don't know. But he became on the radar of somebody who was very suspicious in that moment. Because previous to that, he didn't have that much involvement in her case, not really. I had one conversation with him in Montanito, actually. Someone had thought that they had found a human bone, and he had to be sent out for that. And he spent most of his time kind of engaged with his cell phone. And he made one comment to me, that, homicide detectives don't really like missing persons investigations. So he made that comment. I guess that makes sense. The LASD does not have it at that time, did not have its own missing persons unit. So it was the homicide detectives that kind of handled missing persons. And I say that as opposed to LAPD, who at that time had a separate missing persons unit, and that's what those people's jobs were. So, presumably they were good at it, and they wanted to be doing that. Homicide detectives didn't want to be searching for missing people.
They just
and he was very honest.
murders. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because now they have a potential murder on their hands, and all of a sudden all these weird things are taking place, these weird actions, very strange actions on the day Mitrice's remains were found, and given the condition of her remains, that they were partially mummified, it's like, why would he take the chance of removing her remains the way they did? If there was nothing to cover up, then by all means wait for the coroners to get there, and just like, now you got yourself a real serious case on your hands, right? But to do it the way they did.
So you would think. So this is at this time a very high profile case, right? You're one of the homicide detectives involved in this case. You have naked skeletal remains in a remote area, not too far from where she was last seen. And now you have potentially, her remains. I'm thinking, as a homicide detective, now this is your job. This is what you do. This is what you do well. This is, so why?
He should have been happy at that point that he had something other than a missing persons case. Not that was the best, but that's his job. Like, that's what he wants. Exactly. He wants a situation like this. Okay, you got a situation like this. What gives? And why are you trying to mess it up? Okay, Jesus.
Right. And he has the opportunity, he or they, I mean, we're talking about him right now. So, you have the opportunity to do your job well, to rectify some of the chaos that has been going on in this case from the very beginning, you have the opportunity to do that, and you choose not to. You choose to remove her body, placing her body in the body bag, placing her clothing that was not on her, that it was downstream a bit, placing her clothing inside the body bag. And not only that, there was hair that was kind of throughout the little creek bed, taking that hair, which you can't verify that it was hers at that point because it wasn't on her head, and putting that in the body bag, zipping that body bag up and sending it off.
Something is so wrong with all of that. I mean, so wrong with all of that. And especially given its high profile status back when it was going on, like our community was in a complete uproar. We were scared to death of what was going on in the canyon. And as a result of her going missing, I mean, I'll never forget how I felt. And I wasn't even a journalist at the time. And so it was just such a tragedy. But so now we fast forward. So he was really never on, he was on your radar from the day that he started to make bad decisions about moving that body. But you and I were always, well, I was always focused on Tui Wright. So I was still hyper focused on Tui Wright. Okay.
Well, there are lots of players in this shenanigans. So even when we think about on the day that her body, the remains were found, they weren't, identified as hers, but we were called by one of our volunteers who said, hey, this came across the radio that there were partially mummified naked remains found in the canyon, not too far from Mitrice. So we heard that from one of our volunteers. But when we called, Lieutenant Rawson, who would have been like McElderry's and Acevedo's boss, when we called him, they denied it. They were like, oh, there were just a few bones that were down there. Now, I literally saw a screenshot of what was proposed, what was said was out there. These were more than just a few bones. So we had to take it upon ourselves to drive out there, to be there, because then we were afraid, if you're only telling us that there's a few bones, but we're hearing that this is a whole, mummified body, or, with all the skeletal remains and clothing and hair, if we're hearing that, then you are trying to deceive us. So we went and planted ourselves. Now, they only let us go in so far, and they literally had an armed officer that wouldn't let us go any further than what we'd already came, and they constantly, the time that we got, I want to say we got there around 3 o'clock or something in the afternoon, and they were really just trying to discourage us from staying, wanted us to go home, even though the media was already there. So the media was there, they're seeing what's going on, and we just would not go, and they couldn't get us to go. And so at some point, they decided to lie to us and say that they were going to keep her there overnight, but they actually airlifted her out, and we saw that happening. So even beyond whatever McElderry and Acevedo did in removing the body, we don't know who else was down there. I know Tui Wright was down there. I know Acevedo and
Tui Wright was
Rawson
lying about that whole situation since day one. That's number one. Number two, to me, for them to, I mean, this is just my observation of what we know. Okay. I can't make any definitive claims, but it just seems like they must have found something down there that they did not want us to see.
Yeah.
And that is what made them scramble and do what they did to hide whatever they found.
And ensuring that the coroners did not make it out to the scene before they got her body out.
Yep. So there was something down there that tied this potentially to one of them. And we have thought that since the beginning. And aside from the fact that we discovered that Captain Martin was allegedly raping women, okay? And at least one person came forward and was questioned, interviewed. And what did we come down to? What was the result of that? It was because it had been too long and they couldn't gather the evidence. Is that if
I mean, she had honestly, it had been many years since that had occurred, and she was living
10
out of
at the
state.
time,
I
10.
mean, yeah, there had been enough validity to her claim, though, that they flew out, they meaning the
Affairs.
uh,
Internal
Affairs Department, flew out.
ICIB? Was it ICIB?
Yeah, they flew out to where it was ICIB. They flew out to where she was to interview her. They talked to her multiple times, and they gathered a lot of information. I think that, too much time had passed, and I think they just reached a point where they couldn't like necessarily prove anything. So whether they believed her or not, I think they just, got as far as they
And
could
he
go.
was
And to be
retired.
clear, that's and he was retired. But that's an accusation, that's an allegation, but it is an accusation and an allegation, and it is a fact that he was definitely investigated for sexual assault of that young woman.
Yes.
So,
and I'm sorry, but I'm going to err on the side of the woman. So it just seems just so timely for that event to coincide just months before Mitrice went missing and was found. So,
so, I mean, that's the point. Like there's a lot of players that appear to have engaged in malfeasant behaviors, and they were involved in Mitrice's case, and that starts with Baca, who was in prison for 3 years. That includes with his undersheriff Paul Tanaka. That includes Tui Wright, who was um, uh,
discharged,
accused of engaging in the mishandling in the Rauda case.
yeah.
And Tui meaning the head of the search and rescue team, who was very actively involved in Mitrice's case, and in my opinion, misdirecting where we should search for her, because he definitely steered us away from the creek bed where she was ultimately found. So many of the players that I'm even aware of are under investigation for various types of wrongful behavior under the color of authority. So, I mean, McElderry was somebody who we were concerned about, because we like, why did you remove her body? But there was never anything else until recently that we knew that he was involved in, and that he had, we weren't aware of any.
Let's talk about the new revelation that we just made, or the new information that we came across.
So, a gentleman by the name of Miguel Solario was incarcerated for 23 years. And he recently got exonerated in November of 2023. And what we learned is that one of the main investigators on that case was Daniel McElderry. And I can't get into the specifics of why Mr. Solario was exonerated, but in general, I can tell you this, is that there was a belief that the detective McElderry, who was involved in his case, it was engaged in perjury, falsification of evidence, and various other behaviors surrounding that case. It's really too complicated to get into in this amount of time.
I did link to it in my article, so they can go look at it on Malibu Daily News.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that people go to that link, because what I'm noticing is that while Mr. Solario's exoneration has been all over the news, at least locally here, what you don't find is the details of that. And because he was part of one of the Innocence projects, the Innocence Project did write an extensive dossier on the steps and everything involved about why he got exonerated. And it is only in that write-up on their website that you see McElderry's name, you see his involvement, and you see what the Innocence Project is accusing McElderry of. Why the mainstream media hasn't picked up on that, I don't know. But I do think we should have a lot of concern as a community to know that even as far as 23 years ago, this guy was already engaging in behaviors that would lead an innocent person to go to jail for 23 years. He was 19 years old at the time.
And he just got released in November of last year at 44.
November.
I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
the whole
And another case that I had was aware of for a couple of years. I still maintain the Find Mitrice Facebook page, and so I will post on there from time to time. And under one of my postings, I had put an article about Dan McElderry and Kevin Acevedo removing Mitrice's body. Sometimes I just want to remind people, hey, this happened. And underneath that posting, a woman said, "I'm familiar with these people. Can we talk?" So she began to share with me the story of her friend, who's also named Miguel, but his name is Miguel Gutierrez, and he has been incarcerated now for 13 years. So that in 2010, he was accused, and he's claiming that he was wrongfully accused of murdering someone. And so what she shared with me at the time was that Dan McElderry and Kevin Acevedo were both involved in that case. And again, I don't want to get into the details of that, but generally speaking, it's that these two gentlemen, McElderry and Acevedo, were engaged in coercing witnesses who originally did not identify Miguel Gutierrez as the shooter. But later on, after contact with Acevedo and McElderry, who made promises to them, allegedly including money, allegedly including homes, and allegedly including protection of whatever sort, then these individuals eventually changed their mind, and they did supposedly identify Miguel as the shooter. So originally they said no. They saw a lineup and said it wasn't him. After contact with Acevedo and McElderry, they claimed yes, it was him. When trial came up, the witnesses came forward and said that they had lied and that it wasn't them and that they felt coerced. And they even wrote letters and made statements to this effect. Miguel Gutierrez actually filed an appeal. He unfortunately lost. My hope, though, is that since Miguel Solario has been exonerated, and definitely McElderry was involved in that case, and at least some professionals or legal folks are pointing the finger at him for allowing this guy to sit in prison for 23 years. So my hope is that Miguel Gutierrez, someone will take a second look at his case. And not only Miguel, those are the two cases that I'm aware of. I think every single case that Daniel McElderry has been involved with needs to be looked at, and that includes Mitrice Richardson's case and whatever he was doing down there at that creek bed. So much so that I actually refiled my complaint against him, and specifically for the removal of Mitrice's remains against the orders of the coroners, and in an attempt to get some understanding of why what the purpose was for his actions down there, and actually what happened. Somebody needs to tell us the story of what happened when these law enforcement officers were down there alone with her body. And we don't have to accept that their standard line is there was no wrongdoing. Well, tell us what happened. And I think that McElderry at this point, because he is implicated in at least these three cases that I'm aware of, Miguel Solario, Miguel Gutierrez, and Mitrice Richardson, somebody needs to look at him.
Absolutely. I can't believe nothing's come out of this last decision with Solario being exonerated. And there it is right there in the documents that he falsified his testimony. I mean, he presented false testimony. It's like, how are you still employed by the sheriff's department after knowing that, and after that has been exposed? I mean, I didn't even expose it. Somebody else did.
And
he's still employed.
And I did reach out to, sorry about my phone. I did reach out to the public information officer regarding if the Sheriff Luna was going to make any comment on this issue with Miguel Solario and McElderry's involvement on that. I've gotten no response. So, and as far as I can see, there's been no comment anywhere that I can find from the LASD about McElderry's involvement in Aceveto's incarceration and subsequent exoneration.
Nor has there been any comments on any of my articles from anybody who is on the, you know, supporting side of him perjuring himself during testimony and resulting in a conviction, a wrongful conviction for murder that landed an innocent person in jail for 24 years. What the hell is that?
Yeah.
I
don't know.
I
can't, you know, I cannot imagine how many other individuals he has, whatever, falsified data, perjured themselves, planted, you know, evidence, coerced and intimidated witnesses. I cannot imagine how many people are out there. And I'm hoping that people will hear the story of Miguel Solario, will hear the story of Miguel Gutierrez, remember the story of Mitrice Richardson, and people will begin to come out, because this guy, at least the very least, we know he's dirty. So whatever extent he may or may not have been involved with what happened with Mitrice, we know he was down there on that day. We know he was a witness to what happened, and he was actively engaged in removing her body. And I've never been satisfied with the explanation as to why. The explanation, by the way, was we didn't want to leave her out there to the elements. She had been there for how long, we don't know, but her you know, we're talking about a partially mummified, mostly skeletal remains. You know, you set somebody at the entrance of the creek bed to make sure no one's entering. You know, so we'll see. We'll just have to see.
I definitely, I believe they found something. They panicked. They scooped it all up, got it out of there as fast as they could. And that's just the reality of it. So we're, you know, to be continued.
So I'm still waiting for the response to my complaint. And I can't remember how many, I think they have 10 days or something like that. And I may have only sent it like 5 days ago. So I'm still waiting for the response to my complaints. I'm still waiting for a response from the public information officer. I'm still waiting from a statement from Robert Luna about, you know, about his comments on McElderry and you know, Solario's exoneration. I'm assuming that there's going to be a lawsuit involved in that because, you know, because of McElderry's involvement. That man does not.
Prosecution and the defense, because nobody caught that except for the Innocence Project that went back and went back through the evidence that
you know, and I think the thing is, like, we make certain assumptions about people. I mean, these are people who were either specifically in gangs or gang related, and you know, they may just look at them as throwaway lives, and including Mitrice. I mean, they made no bones about just saying, you know, she's this Black woman who's a prostitute. You know what I mean? Like that was a story that they told themselves in order to not.
They don't get to play God, though. They do not get to play God.
And that has been my stance with them. By the way, Mitrice, you know, she, you know, graduated with honors from Cal State Fullerton, and she was, you know, headed on her way to grad school, wanting to be, you know, a pediatric psychologist. You know, presumably would have, you know, had a very successful life and a successful career. That is not what brings value to her life, though. What brings value to her life is she was a living human being. So even if she was a prostitute or all the things that they accuse her of, even if those things were true, she has every single right to have an investigation into her disappearance at the time, into her murder at the time, whatever they would have thought. And I would say the same thing for Miguel Gutierrez, who's sitting in a jail now for 13 years. Whether he was gang affiliated or not, he still has the right to the due process of the law. Absolutely. And he still has the right to walk the streets and be free if he didn't engage in that crime. And
more importantly, who did it? Because that person's running free.
Yeah, because you think you can just, let's just get another woman out of the street, then that just allows you to lead somebody else out there free. By the way, in the case of Miguel Solario, they did ultimately find out who the shooter was, and it wasn't him. But that man spent 23 years in prison, and all McElderry had to do.
Where's the actual shooter? Do we know?
The shooter is deceased. And I believe the shooter was actually his brother, from
Ooh.
what I'm reading on the, yeah. So what happened is McElderry just decided, you have a car in where you live that's, registered to someone named Miguel Solario, and that car was seen, in the vicinity of this murder. Well, what McElderry didn't do, and he admits to, he didn't actually dig a little bit deeper, because that car did not belong. Well, it belonged to Miguel Solario Sr. So this belonged to his dad. And Miguel himself didn't even drive the car, but his brother was driving the car, according to reports. But if you don't do your job and you don't care, you're not gonna figure that out. So
Well, as I
yeah,
said earlier, to be continued.
yeah. Let's continue that. I definitely want to update you if I do in fact get a response regarding the complaints. I'll definitely want to check back in and let you know how that's going.